All right, so that's where we are as a nation. Well, the race for State House has been thrown into disarray. But the question remains as to whether this is going to remain that way. And in studio, I have, well, three gentlemen who are going to help us get a clearer picture of what is going on. And with me, I have Agostino Neto, who is a lawyer and immediate former member of parliament for Ndiwa constituency. Good morning, and thank you for joining us. We also have Ndegwa Njiro, who is an advocate. Thank you for joining us. And Caleb Koesitani, who is member of parliament for Soy constituency. Now, the race for State House has been thrown into disarray. And after one of the candidates, Raila Odinga, withdrew, the race is now shrouded in uncertainties over the next course of action, with NASA calling for fresh elections in 3 months and Jubilee insisting that the repeat march is set for October the 26th must go on. In studio, I've already introduced who we have, and what we'd like to do is, first of all, just start with a very general question, and I'll start with the legal minds. Let me start with you, Agostino. And is there anything like a lacuna or a constitutional crisis? Does the constitutional, or rather the law, allow for a crisis?
Anyway, I mean, I think there is no crisis in Kenya, and there'll never be a crisis in Kenya. Three things are going to happen. One, like you see, Jubilee rightfully said they want to have the elections on October the 26th. Even if an election was not to conduct on the October the 26th, Article 146 of the Constitution says that, you know, the presidency becomes vacant when the next president is elected. So until such a time that we have a regularly scheduled election, as an Article 146 of the Constitution, there's still a president. So there's no crisis in whatsoever. What we might be having is a political crisis, but not to the extent that Kenyans should be worried. I mean, yesterday, when the Prime Minister Raila Odinga withdrew his candidature, most people are really wondering what is going to go on in the country. There are two possibilities. One, if IEBC, Jubilee, and the rest of the Kenyans grant Raila and NASA their wish, then there's going to be an election before before December the 26th, which is 60 days from the date when the election was scheduled. But if at all that is not to be, if Jubilee and IEBC and everyone else goes against NASA, then there's going to be an election on October the 26th. So either way, we still have an election, October 26th or before the December 26th. But then again, there's no vacancy and there's no crisis because there's still a presidency and Kenya is still moving on.
NASA has been talking about a caretaker government. Is there such a thing?
Not exactly. I mean, I think, of course, when you're in the political forum, you can't say anything else you want. But you see, yes, there was a caretaker government between the time Uhuru Kenyatta was elected on August the 8th and September the 1st. You see, between August the 8th and September the 1st, Uhuru was a president-elect. And in the instance of president-elect, the law that is operative is Article 135 of the Constitution, which diminishes some powers of the presidency. The president does not have all the powers. The president-elect doesn't have all the powers of a president. But you see, what scenario we had on September the 1st is that that particular election was nullified, which means there's no election in the first place, which in legal terms, we resumed status quo ante. We went to the place where Uhuru was before the presidential election was conducted in the first place. So one, there is no caretaker government, no. And two, Uhuru is no longer president-elect, which means he has full powers of presidency until such a time when, again, him or Raila becomes president-elect.
All right. Let me come to you, Ndegwa Njiro, and ask the same question. Does the law allow for, as an advocate, does the law foresee any crisis? We've had the politics in this country, and the political class tell us that we are heading towards what has now been termed a constitutional crisis.
I agree with my learned friend that insofar as the incumbency is an issue, there is no vacancy and there is no vacuum. Insofar as Article 146 is an issue. However, where the presidential candidate for NASA ushered us in yesterday is a strange and a very foreign ground, in the sense that our constitution does not contemplate situations whereby a presidential candidate withdraws. It only contemplates a situation whereby a presidential candidate dies. But what he did yesterday is very strange to the constitution and to any other enabling laws, in the sense that the law does not tell us what happens in the event a presidential candidate withdraws. That then brings us to the situation, what then happens? Because where there is either an election having been invalidated or where there is, by the Supreme Court, or the laws tells us within what number of the days we must conduct a fresh elections. If it is a situation whereby the presidential candidates never garnered the requisite threshold, also the law tells us we must do it within 30 days. But now, why we are in a political limbo, and maybe even a legal quagmire, is that we are not told what happens where a presidential candidate withdraws and within what number of the days we must conduct an elections. And the question then would be whether we must do an election as called for by NASA, or the IBC can then swear in the president. Those are some of the challenges we are having. I say, in the first instance, Chebukati has taken us on this path. For one reason, that when the Supreme Court ruled that there ought to be a fresh election, the Supreme Court was dealing with Article 140, most especially Clause 3, which provides that where there is an invalidation of the presidential election, a fresh election will be held. That fresh election is what Justice Mutunga and the Supreme Court of 2013 was dealing with. And they said, and that is true to say, that any fresh elections contemplated in the Constitution dealing with the presidency can only be held under Article 138. Is one that operationalizes any election that ought to be done in respect to the office of the presidency. Now, what Chebukati did, and that is why he has taken us to where we are, he took the decision of the Supreme Court of 2013 and put it in the situation of 2017. How? Because when a fresh elections under Article 140 takes us to Article 138, Article 138, the operational specific provisions is Article 138, Clause 1 and Clause 2, which says that there must be nominations in the event whereby an election has been invalidated. And that nomination is what has now not taken place. Remember, the Supreme Court in 2013 said that when you're dealing with Article 140, Clause 3, the candidates who are supposed to go for the elections are the ones who had previously participated in the previous elections. But they have to present their nomination papers afresh to the IBC. Why? Because when the Supreme Court in 2017 declared the whole process nullity, it also affected the nomination processes. For one reason, that the Supreme Court said that election is a process and not an event.
Let me pause you there because I want to bring in Caleb Kostani, the Member of Parliament for Soy, and hear your comments, first of all, as to whether we are headed for a crisis. From the political plane, we feel like we are cliff hanging. Literally, it's like the country is just about to go over the cliff. Your comments and your thoughts, sir.
Well, I think the country is not in a crisis, as my two brothers here have stated. What is happening is the confusion in NASA. The desperation in NASA is what we are seeing. They're really desperate to get power through the back door. I think they have done their calculations, and it's good that they did it. They know you win an election through numbers, not through processes. So they are afraid of the process because they know they don't have the numbers. And we as Jubilee, as was stated yesterday by our party leader and the deputy party leader, we are ready for elections on the 26th. You can always know that the body language of NASA has not been to go for elections. Immediately after the annulment of the win or victory of Jubilee presidential candidate and his running mate, we hit the campaign.
Although they have made it very clear that their reason for not going for the elections is because they need a level and a level playing field. We have given them a level playing field all along. Raila lost in 1997. He asked for changes in the Electoral Commission. Then it was granted. He lost in 2013. He asked for changes. It was granted. He's lost in 2017. I mean, no matter what, even we made Raila the chairman of the IBC, he would still have to count the votes and he would lose. So really, let's let this country move forward. Let this country move forward. Let's stop these games. We don't have any stalemate in as far as my brothers have stated here. I saw yesterday somebody talking about withdrawal is the same as death. I mean, honestly. It can never be. It can never be. It can never be, even in simple English terms. And it's good we have two great lawyers here, and they have stated it. Withdrawal is withdrawal. A dead person cannot speak, cannot do nothing. So this is not about death. Somebody has withdrawn. He has run away from the race. I said this election is about, it's like a football game.
Your 11 players, the referee has counted, there's 11-11, he blows the whistle. The other team decides to stay and say, we didn't hear the whistle. And the other team scores. So
all right,
really, we need to move on.
A couple of things that Honorable Caleb Constantine speaks to, which I really want to respond to. First is the sense of entitlement. You were saying we have given them. We have given them. I mean, all of us belong to this country. So, I mean, sovereignty belongs to all of us. So we actually share both good and bad that come out of the democratic processes. So I really think in its entirety, Kenyans have given a few things. And that is why we're here. We have a good constitution and people at least have space. We have political parties. But the second thing I'd like to say is this. I think Chebukati brought us to this particular level, like my learned colleague says very well. He absolutely had no business looking at the 2013 obiter. I mean, the opinions of the Supreme Court of 2013, he had no business whatsoever looking at those particular principles. But now that he looked at them, and that is what Jubilee was proceeding on, I really think it's also now unfair for Jubilee to come back and say that he cannot proceed on that very principle. My two colleagues say that nowhere in the law do you anticipate a withdrawal. Yes, you do not anticipate that in the Constitution, but in the Supreme Court decision of 2013 that IEBC relied on, they actually say that there would be, if a presidential candidate does abscond, then what happens then is an election under Article 138.8 of the Constitution. Now, granted, there is no political crisis, there's no legal crisis, because either way, there's room and window in terms of how we can navigate these particular circumstances. That one, Raila is not saying he's withdrawing for his own ends. Raila is saying, the level playing field is, I mean, the field is not level. And I think to walk into an election in that manner is to, for example, give Uhuru legitimacy, the presidency, having contested it. So I really think that we must give it to him. And I said somewhere else yesterday that, look, what Raila is advocating for right now might not be good for Raila, the person, but it might be good for the country. Let us have an election laws that really make sure that whoever is a winner in a legitimate process, as opposed to always having us go back and forth in the manner that someone else would. Why don't you believe, for example, if they're so interested and so sure that they can win this election, why don't they just move forward to the minimum reforms that Raila is asking for? And that is why I think he did. People were arguing that there's very few moments left to the election. He has given them now 78 days now. He's withdrawn his candidature. We have 78 days now. Can we look at the laws? Can we look at the enabling environment so that at least we can...
All right, you've initially said that there's a sense of entitlement, but you've used the same term. You've said that Raila has given. Not sure whether he has given, but you wanted to respond to that, sir.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to him and say, he's saying that we should give in to the minimum, irreducible minimum that ODM have given in, or NASA for that case. But we've done it before. It has happened before. Whether it was constitutional, whether it was the right thing to do or not, it has happened before, and Raila has not won an election. Mm-hmm. We can even do it now, and he's not going to win an election. But at times when you're asking for something, you need also to be genuine. You need also to use reason and say, is this thing practicable? Is it possible with the time frame that we have? No. What does our Constitution say? Elections within 60 days. Is it possible to change the CEO of IEBC 14 days to the election? It's not possible. Is it possible to change the chairman now within the next 14 days? It is not possible. So you need to put the country first. Okay. And in this case, as I said before...
Those demands were not made yesterday, so they've been there for a while. So it's not just 14 days. It's been for a while.
Even if they've been there for the last 2 months, it was not possible. Mm-hmm. It was not possible within that period. And you need to give reasons. We want NASA to respect the Supreme Court fully, the Supreme Court ruling, and take it as a wholesome. You don't take it in bits. The Supreme Court ruled, and they said we find nobody capable of any offense. There was a court ruling the other day. They had sued, I don't know who. The ruling also said IBC officials should continue. None of them is capable. None of them has done any wrong. Why are they not agreeing with that court ruling? Why are they agreeing with what to take us to the streets?
And before you come in, it is indeed a race where the contestants have widely divided views. The division is captured well by remarks made by Musalia Mudavadi and Deputy President William Ruto in reference to the rerun and a call for fresh elections. Let's listen into what they had to say.
Our withdrawal from the election requires the IEBC to cancel the election and conduct fresh nominations. The procedure for nomination of presidential candidates is provided for in the Elections Act 2011, Section 13, Subsection 1.
Kama IEBC watasema kwa sababu hakuna candidate mwingine, yule ambaye alibakia Uhuru Kenyatta atangazwe kama rais wa Jamhuri ya Kenya. hiyo pia tuko tayari.
All right, so what are your comments to that, Ndegwa Njiro?
May I say that we gave unto ourselves a constitution that has given the frameworks within which things must be done in this country.
Before you carry on, there's something you mentioned after those comments that Haiwezi. What is it that you're referring to?
Or was that was off the cuff?
That was inobita. but you see, I have heard the Deputy President proposing that since Raila Odinga has withdrawn from the race, that the President should then be sworn in. Yes and no. Yes, because if Chebukati never took us to the decision of 2013, and if the political parties' presidential nominees presented their nomination papers afresh to the IBC, that would be possible. In the sense that then would be only having one presidential candidate, and Article 138 says where there is only one presidential candidate nominated, then that presidential candidate shall be deemed to be president-elect. And then why then it is not possible for them to declare him the president is because the only avenue that provides for such a scenario is where the rule says, the election rule says, where there is only one presidential candidate nominated. But the question and the million-dollar question is there a presidential candidate who is duly nominated, even prior to Raila Odinga's withdrawal? I've always held a position that since the declaration of the Supreme Court's decision, Chebukati never took initiative to have any presidential candidate nominated, even at the time of the withdrawal of Raila Odinga. And even during the campaigns of President Uhuru Kenyatta, to me and in law, they have not been presidential candidates. Why? Because Chebukati never followed what the Constitution says.
For nominations?
For nominations. I would read, if you don't mind, the Constitution.
Okay, I'll come back to you, but let me hear Agustino as you refer to that part of the Constitution. Agustino Neto, your thoughts on that?
You know this particular presidential election that was going to be between Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga was a strange one. Strange because of two things. One, and I'm happy before Ndegwa reads the Constitution, a couple of things. You see, the Constitution anticipates fresh elections under three possible scenarios.
Correct.
One is under Article 138(5) of the Constitution. And that particular scenario is where two presidential candidates are run, but one of them is ahead, but none has gotten 50+1 and 25% of votes in the counties, as anticipated by Article 138(2) of the Constitution. That is one scenario. But the second scenario that anticipates a fresh election under the Constitution is Article 138(8) of the Constitution, which means one, either a presidential candidate dies, one of the presidential candidates who has been duly nominated dies, then you have a fresh election conducted within 60 days. The third one is a scenario where you have a fresh election under Article 143 of the election. That particular one means that the election that was there before has been nullified, so it's a fresh election.
And just to round up, the other election is when the presidential terms comes to an end. So there are actually four.
Okay, now that adds the one, but that is not anticipated by Article 138 of the Constitution. Correct. But of course, if the presidential election comes to an end, that is the reason why you're actually having an election in the first place under Article 138 of the Constitution. But now, if the election in which we're proceeding in was under Article 143 of the Constitution, what Chebukati ought to have done was to have then let all the candidates who participated in the election of August 8th to be on the ballot. However, the Supreme Court in its 2013 obiter, which is what now Ranasa was using yesterday, said that ordinarily, if at all you're going to have an election that has been nullified under Article 143, then you might not need a fresh nomination. Correct. Now, IBC did proceed on the fact that, yes, you might not need a fresh nomination. However, it took away or denied the other members, the Okura Court, and the other independent candidates a chance to run. Now, that is where the problem is, because then we do not know whether he was following the Constitution or if he was following the obiter, the opinions of the Supreme Court of 2013. Now, because he's following the opinion of the Supreme Court in 2013, he has to then follow it to the end. Raila has withdrawn. He must then proceed as to what that particular opinion says, which means once a candidate absconds, withdraws or dies, then the principle of Article 138(8) of the Constitution proceeds, which means an election then conducts in 60 days with fresh nominations duly then happening.
All right. Degwa, before we take a break, maybe
Yes.
just what you wanted to read on the Constitution.
Yes, Article 138, and it is important for Kenyans to read the law. It says, if only one candidate for president is nominated, that candidate shall be declared elected. If two or more candidates for the president are nominated, an election shall be held in each and every constituency. Now, assuming that Chebukati's reading of the Supreme Court's decision 2013 arrived at a decision of having two presidential candidates nominated, that is Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga. Then the other question is then, were there two presidential candidates nominated? If the answer is in affirmative, yes, then an election must be held in each and every constituency. Now the question is then, if then there is a withdrawal, what then happens? That takes us to what I'm then calling a legal limbo, or a political uncertainty, in the sense that Chebukati should have called all the nominated presidential candidates for the 8th of August. Remember, the Supreme Court said that the elections being a process was declared a nullity, void ab initio. That means even the nominations of President Uhuru Kenyatta that was done on 8th of August and of Raila Odinga that was done on 8th of August was also affected by this order of nullity. So which wisdom did Chebukati come up with in determining that Aukori Aukot's nomination was a nullity and Raila Odinga's nomination was not affected by the illegality? How was he able to square out that issue? So as to tell us the only presidential candidate is Raila Odinga and Uhuru Kenyatta. And that's why I'm saying Chebukati needs to come out clean and tell us whether he has been part and parcel of this wider scheme. Remember yesterday, something interesting happened. When NASA was announcing their withdrawal, they said that they have a problem with 4 IBC commissioners. I'm assuming that they then do not have a problem with 3 commissioners, noting that there are 7. The question is, who are these 3 good to them and who are these bad to them? And is Chebukati among the 3? So those are the fundamental questions and the candid questions that we ask.
All right, interesting questions are being raised right here on this debate. When we come back, we want to take a short break. We'll be looking at the possible scenarios that we are faced as a country. What are the scenarios that we have, given that now the NASA presidential candidate, Raila Odinga, has withdrawn his candidature? So what do we face? Remember, you are welcome to participate in this conversation. We'll also be opening up the phone lines. This is Morning Express. We've got your morning covered. We'll take a short break. We'll be right back.